Well, ladies, I'm so glad you could both come to today's Henry James support group. Considering the distressing endings of our novels, I think it would be extremely helpful for us to comfort each other in defense against Mr. Henry James's cruel manipulations. What a man to have conceived such abysmal stories! I will begin. My name is Isabel Osmond, née Archer, from The Portrait of a Lady, and I have been tricked into a loveless marriage by a pair of devious Europeans. My husband, Gilbert Osmond, only loves me for my money and good looks, and I am considering leaving him for Caspar Goodwood, an American who has truly loved me all along. However, even the idea of such a scandal frightens me. I am Maria Gostry from The Ambassadors, and I helped the main character, Louis Strether, open his mind to the wonders and the flaws of Europe. Even after we developed such a close bond, he decided to reject me in favor of his beloved America. I'm quite certain that no one in my novel, The Ambassadors, has a happy ending. We are all quite abused and exploited in the name of our readers' entertainment. Yes, it would seem as if the Golden Bowl concludes amicably for all, but truly I can't be expected to forgive my husband for his blatant adultery so easily. I am Maggie née Verver, and coincidentally, my handsome Italian prince of a husband, Amerigo, also married me for my fortune. Mr. James seems to think women are only good for one thing. Regardless, Amerigo's former lover married my father for his money, and they carried on their affair for years, while my father and I remained quite oblivious, enclosed as we were in our familial euphoria. I feel that we've all had very similar situations, and I think both of you could really help me with my situation. Ever since I disobeyed Gilbert by visiting my cousin Ralph before he died, the house has been absolutely unbearable. Since the end of the novel, I've returned from England, but he hasn't spoken a word to me, and he has decided to extend the duration of his daughter's exile to the convent. The poor girl, she's extremely alone. She ought to have a mother. I'm not old enough to be hers, but I certainly cannot abandon her. On the other hand, I truly cannot imagine the prolonged torture my marriage will continue to cause, especially now that I've experienced what love should really be. When I was in England, Caspar Goodwood quite impulsively kissed me. I've never felt that way in my life, certainly never with Gilbert, and yet it terrified me. I hate to lose control like that. It's too frightening. It's too different from who I want to be. I completely understand, Isabel. In my novel, The Golden Bowl, I've been married to Amerigo for years, but something still holds me back. When he takes me into his arms, I can feel the frenzy of emotion approaching, and it's such an unknown land that I step back. I'm certain that only a man would depict women so frightened of intimacy. Perhaps Mr. James himself shares our reservations. Perhaps he is wholly uncomfortable with such things. Considering the tumult of our marriages, I wouldn't be very shocked if Mr. James had never married. Our stories are warnings against such entanglements. Now that you've brought it up, I realize Louis Strether, the protagonist of my story, very much distanced himself from that sort of thing. He seemed completely unaware of it, in fact. He only ever realized that his would-be stepson was involved in an inappropriate affair with that Parisian woman, Madame de Vionnet, after he nearly caught them in the act. At any rate, I think the wretched outcome of my overtures toward Louis presents Mr. James's most definitive renunciation of marriage. It was his voice issuing from Strether's lips as the latter announced that he would return to America, even with the prospect of his engagement completely ruined. Well, I've certainly learned my lesson. Men simply are not worth the effort. And I hope you take to heart my lesson as well, Isabel. Even the Americans are not to be trusted. Your Mr. Goodwood may seem worlds better than your current situation. The perfect solution, perhaps, but I assure you that very nearly anything is possible. American, English, Italian, they're all the same. They're all capable of the same inconsideration. No, I think I disagree, based on my experiences anyway. Although Casper obviously has his flaws, and although I do not regret rejecting his first proposal, I don't know how best to say it, but there is still something compelling about him, something that draws me to him. Perhaps it's that he is so very American, so new and fresh. Perhaps it's only the contrast so striking between him and my husband, the pinnacle of Italian breeding. For some reason, I feel that Casper simply is not capable of the same sort of deception Gilbert brewed with that harpy, Madame Merle. It's still such a shock to me, it hasn't fully sunken in. You wouldn't believe the abject horror I felt when I first saw them together like that, and the whole terrible arrangement first occurred to me, when I first conceived the possibility that they had used me for the benefit of their misbegotten child. I feel so blind. How could I have been so naive? How did I not notice the signs? Don't blame yourself. Remember to whom you owe everything. It seems to be Mr. James's objective to make fools out of all of us Americans. My Italian prince of a husband and his wench Charlotte Stant deceived me as well. Like you, it took years for me to understand that not only had they used my father and me for our money, but they were also continuing behind our backs. When he discovered my awareness of the affair, when I found that damn golden bowl, the same one they had found on a clandestine shopping trip days before our wedding, and when our friend Fanny broke it, I was certain it was all over. The bowl was broken, and so was our marriage. Amerigo and I were just too different. The vast disparity between us and between our perceptions of the world, so influenced by our respective lands of origin, seemed too far to cross. He failed even to comprehend the wrongness of his actions. Almost comical now, how evil the old world is compared to our virgin homeland. And yet we all ended up here, didn't we? We all left that shining, virtuous land for this decadent continent. We were all enchanted by the beauty, the romance. Oh, absolutely. The minute I first arrived here, I knew I could not return. Perhaps it only appeals to senses such as ours, so accustomed to the modernity of America. That is how I trapped myself into this sorry marriage. Gilbert just seemed so charming and so adventurous. I can only suppose that Mr. James felt the same way, or he wouldn't have subjected all of us to such mistakes. Yes, you're right, he shifted back and forth across the Atlantic his entire life, and he could never truly choose between one and the other. I'm sure that, in writing our stories, he hoped to explore his own feelings on the matter. Through dropping innocent Americans in Europe, pushing us around and seeing what happened, he hoped to decide once and for all which he truly preferred. It seems that he fell more in love with Europe later in life, for Europe seems to have a generally salutary effect on us Americans in ambassadors. And while my Italian husband does partake in an affair, it is a bit more forgivable than when your Gilbert Osmond commits the same sin. All in all, Amerigo is a much more favorable man, I think. Obviously, I would have preferred not to have to deal with my husband's affair at all, but it was a surprisingly easy thing to end it, and I know that he respects me much more for the way I chose to handle the situation. Instead of starting a great dramatic confrontation with his mistress, I did the exact opposite. I refused to tell her of my knowledge of the affair. I even embraced her and kissed her cheek. When Amerigo saw that, I know that he was completely astonished. In fact, I may now resemble my husband more than my father. Europe has certainly made its mark on me. Well, that is precisely my problem. Besides Amerigo's carrying on, he is essentially a rather nice, charming man. My Gilbert, on the other hand, well, there is absolutely nothing in him to compensate for the wretchedness he has caused me. And the only obvious crime he has committed for which I can publicly blame him is his carrying on with Madame Merle, which happened long before our marriage. There is no way for me to even reproach him, no way for me to change his behavior for the better. Oh, it appears that our time is up. I thank you both for your advice, and I will take them into consideration while deciding how to act. I hope to see both of you next week. Oh, it was a pleasure to visit you. Talking with you two has helped me to come to terms with my own experiences, and it's a wonderful thing to know that I'm not the only one who's not exactly pleased with our dear author. Good day.